Let the vote begin. All in favor of giving Gibbs to the Australopithecines, raise your hands.
Is this what we sacrifice so much for? To be held down by institutionalized racism? Oh, I'm not a racist.
Then it's settled. The motion carries.
Free speech may seem like a mundane issue at this point, especially in the US where we have a constitutionally protected right to it. But the reality is that it's much more complicated than that. You've probably heard by now that the crowdfunding site Patreon has been banning right-wing content creators. The activist Martin Sellner and journalist Lauren Southern recently had their pages deleted, with Patreon claiming that their funding was being used for activities which were likely to cause loss of life, undoubtedly referring to Generation Identity's efforts to blockade illegal migrant boats and prevent them from reaching European shores. Apparently, people who sneak onto the European continent illegally are unlikely to cause loss of life in Patreon's eyes. A few days ago, Patreon CEO Jack Conte released a statement via his YouTube channel.
So here we go. Here's how we made the decision to remove the pages of the members of Defend Europe. From a high level, we removed their pages because they directly obstructed a search and rescue ship in the Mediterranean. And they made a variety of statements and outlined plans to obstruct similar rescue ships in the future. And that's a violation of a section of our content policy that prohibits creators from threatening to take or from taking action that could lead to harm or loss of life. We believe that she was not only participating in the mission, but at times she was actively directing the operation. Again, she's instructing the boat operator to get in front of a rescue ship.
Get in front, Thomas! Get in front! Thomas, go!
No, it's too dangerous. We can't go in front. We can't go right in front.
They have to stop. They gotta go in front of the boat!
These are examples of manifest observable behavior.
He repeatedly refers to human trafficking ships as rescue boats, and completely neglects to mention that the actions of the non-government organizations manning the so-called rescue boats are against the law. Make no mistake, illegal human trafficking operations. Quote, a prosecutor in Sicily has made the extraordinary claim that NGO migrant rescue boats are in direct communication and collusion with human traffickers in Libya. We have evidence that there are direct contacts between certain NGOs and people traffickers in Libya, Carmelo Zuccaro told Italian newspaper La Stampa. We do not yet know if and how we could use this evidence in court, but we are quite certain about what we say. Telephone calls from Libya to certain NGOs, lamps that eliminate the route to these organizations' boats, and boats that suddenly turn off their transponders are ascertained facts, he said. EU border agency Frontex has long warned against NGO rescue boats, accusing them of encouraging traffickers. In December, the Financial Times reported on confidential Frontex documents which suggested migrants had been given clear indications before departure on the precise direction to be followed in order to reach the NGO's boats. Jack's motive is blatantly political, and he lies by omission throughout his statement. He compares the impediment of these human traffickers to blocking the doors to a hospital, as though the illegal migrants in question are entitled to come into Europe.
Do you remember this photo from 2015? It's the image of Alan Kurdi, a child who drowned in the Mediterranean after his family's ship capsized in the ocean. Last year, 5,000 people like that child died in the Mediterranean. One thing I want to make clear is that if instead of getting in front of the ship, they had just stayed on the side of the ship, that's totally okay. That is free speech. But there's a difference between standing outside of a hospital and holding up a sign and yelling and screaming and exercising your freedom to speak versus standing in front of a hospital door and obstructing people from getting in or out who need to treat someone who's in trouble.
Conte then takes a brief moment to try and score points by mentioning the later removal of It's Going Down, an anti-fascist propaganda outlet which was also raising funds via Patreon.
So next is why we removed IGD. This is another clear-cut example of a creator not following content policy. First, they published the doxing of an individual. Doxing is the practice of publishing private information about a person, like their home address or their phone number. This is a behavior that leads to all kinds of awful that I'm not going to get into right now, but doxing is not okay for Patreon creators. Second, they published articles that demonstrated and encouraged pouring concrete over railroad tracks. The article discusses safety precautions, including notifying the train operators, but this is still a dangerous action that could potentially potentially lead to people dying. In addition to being dangerous, it's actually a property crime, which is also against our content policy. There are probably going to be a lot of people who say that we're just taking down IGD's page just to seem like we're being politically unbiased and fair, so I want to cut that argument off right here. The Trust and Safety team has a queue of reported pages, and they work through them in an order that they think reflects the urgency of taking down those pages.
There's one really important difference here, though. The actions of Martin Sellner, Lauren Southern, Gen Identity, and the Defend Europe mission were being carried out in an effort to stop these blatant violations of the law, while It's Going Down is engaging in advocacy, glorification, and material support of violations of the law. In fact, the New Jersey branch of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has officially designated Antifa tactics as domestic terrorism, in light of all they've done since the 2016 presidential election. Antifa groups and their agitprop outlets like It's Going Down routinely incite and celebrate violent protests and political actions, including vandalism of university frats, mass destruction of property, and in one case, even the stabbing of a police officer's horse. It's Going Down even produced flyers directly comparing Trump supporters to Nazis, complete with a depiction of violence against them. I'm not sure if this legally qualifies as a call to action, but if it doesn't, it's pretty damn close. Comparing the actions of Sellner and Southern to the actions of Antifa and It's Going Down is simply dishonest and ideological. Patreon dragged their feet when it came to removing the It's Going Down creator page, and we actually have documentation of Patreon staff expressing personal support for Antifa. Here are some choice quotes from Aaron Ringenberger, a DevOps engineer at Patreon. Joe DeGeneres says, Patreon's, quote, work includes funding this violent group, despite receiving numerous warnings about them. To which Aaron says, this looks like a great group with a good mission statement. I see no problem. We need active anti-fascist groups in the age of Trump. And breaking windows is not violence. Milo's hate speech and harassment are violence. In obvious reference to the domestic terrorist actions of Antifa at UC Berkeley. There is no reason to believe that they would have removed the page had people not complained. And, as you've also likely heard by now, mass flagging on social media in an effort to remove dissenting views is becoming more common. I'm not entirely sure who started it, but recently we have seen various content creators become the targets of mass flagging campaigns, including Rage After Storm, Murdoch, Batco, Tara McCarthy, Black Pigeon Speaks, Sean and Jen, Coach Red Pill, and Kraut and T. And that's just in the past few weeks. Regardless of whose political camp is guilty of what, it goes without saying that abusing terms of service cannot be the future of political discussion on social media, especially since it seems unlikely that YouTube really cares about commentary channels relative to the much larger and more profitable spheres of gaming, unboxing, cat videos, and so on. A ceasefire would be a wise move for everyone, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, but this is obviously optimistic, and we will always have to deal with bad actors who abuse the system. I've mirrored Murdoch's newest video to my second channel, so enjoy that while it lasts. But thankfully, alternatives to YouTube and Patreon are beginning to spring up. A new crowdfunding site called Hatreon was recently launched and is intended to be a copy of the Patreon format. Because the site is in its early stages for the time being, you will need an invite code to create an account, so if you're interested, contact me via bravetheruins@gmail.com and I'll provide you with an invite code. There's also a new site called Rootbox, which functions as a sort of hybrid of PayPal and GoFundMe, and yet another upcoming option is Pax Dickinson's Counterfund, slated to launch this fall. It seems likely that I'll get kicked off of Patreon in the future, so if you already pledged to me, I would urge you to change your pledge over to Hatreon or Rootbox before that happens. I would also urge you to follow me on Minds.com and Vid.me, as Twitter and YouTube are not hospitable environments either. Beginning today, I will be mirroring all content to Minds and VidMe as a precaution, so if anything happens to my YouTube or Twitter, you will be able to find me on those sites. However, it should be noted that VidMe may not be all it's cracked up to be when it comes to free speech.
So this is the complete email, just leaving out his name. So I saw your video. I was like, okay, well, I expected that to happen, right? Wanted to let you know we've removed your post from the VidMe subreddit for violating its rules. We were excited and hopeful to find a way to work together with you, so I was disappointed by the tone of your video relative to what I interpreted as a friendly conversation. Wish you all the best in the future. You can donate the t-shirts we sent you to charity. The thing that they say is come to VidMe so that you can express yourself in the ways that you want to express. And when you look at it here, what they're saying is they have the mentality that they will willingly, knowingly delete criticism about VidMe on something like Reddit, right? Well, if you sit there and you look at, well, that's just Reddit. But remember, they control their own terms of service on VidMe. If you go and you look at the terms of service on VidMe, so the reality is, if you look at the terms of service of VidMe, any post that they find to be intolerant or to push people's buttons, they can remove off of VidMe. And now they have documented in writing that they are willing to use that type of authority to eliminate criticism from another social networking platform, which makes you have to ask, how long until they do this on VidMe?
All of these events can teach us a broader lesson about the practical reality of free speech, something some of those who count themselves amongst the free speech activists, alt-right, skeptic community, and cultural libertarian circles seem to have failed to understand. Ironically, social justice activists and progressive leftists actually understand the functional value of free speech extremely well, in the sense that they recognize how powerful the chilling effect of no platforming can be. They understand that being free to say what you really think is meaningless if those thoughts are not also given an audience. This is exemplified in the way ContraPoints tried to chastise Roaming Millennial for interviewing Richard Spencer. Because the conversation played out in a fashion which gave Spencer free rein to express himself, instead of being the subject of a constrained hit piece, Contra felt the need to step in and preach to Roaming about the proper way to talk to someone like Spencer.
You seem to sort of view Richard Spencer as a person with whom you have another person with whom you have political disagreements, whereas I kind of view him as a propagandist for I hope it's not too strong to say, but basically utter monstrosity. And so to me, to give him a platform, a sympathetic platform, or a platform where he's sort of just allowed to say what he wants and where that's taken at face value, is dangerous and reckless. I have seen interviews or debates with people who are outright Nazis or neo-Nazis or white supremacists that I think are helpful. So for instance, I really like the journalist Louis Theroux. He's an English journalist who you may have heard of, but he does these documentaries called Weird Weekends. But his way of engaging with them is sort of initially non-confrontational, but with the ultimate goal of exposing some kind of like horror or contradiction. So I find them very revealing. So it's not that I think that we should just never talk to someone who's a white nationalist or who's a Nazi, but I think that because of the danger and because of the extremity of their views, I think it's wrong to interview them and to sort of give them free rein to present their ideas in a sort of way where they're not going to be very heavily criticized.
I kind of view him as a propagandist, initially non-confrontational, but with the ultimate goal of exposing some kind of like horror or contradiction.
The concept of free speech itself exists specifically for the most politically and socially marginal perspectives. The Overton window conceptualizes the range of acceptable discourse, with positions becoming more acceptable as we approach the center. Free speech is most relevant to the concepts outside of the window, and what is considered acceptable speech can vary depending on who you're talking to. If we're thinking in terms of, say, Patreon's conception of acceptable speech, simply being right-wing at all might be said to be radical or even unthinkable. After all, even my friend Naked Ape had his Patreon removed some time ago, and the marginalization of right-wing ideas by the corporate sector is a perfect example of how suppression of speech is not just limited to government action. We in the US glorify the concept of free speech just because a centuries-old legal document says we have it, and yet many on the right must constantly hold their tongues for fear of having their livelihood taken from them. If speaking your mind means not being able to keep your job, pay your rent, and feed your family, you could hardly be said to have free speech in any meaningful way. In short, the only situation in which I could be persuaded to endorse no platforming would involve advocacy of political violence, or as our anti-fascist friends call it, direct action. In light of all this, it's rather pathetic that many on the anti-progressive side of the political divide seem to be under an illusion that turning away from or even endorsing no platforming of certain views will somehow earn them credibility from the progressives they claim to oppose. Case in point, the Anti-Defamation League recently released a new hate watch list, which describes people like Mike Cernovich and Gavin McInnes as being sympathetic to white supremacists and anti-Semites, despite repeated efforts by McInnes and Cernovich to denounce people that they themselves describe as white supremacists and anti-Semites.
The end result of sympathizing with terrorists is that you will have more terrorism. That's the end result. There's no debate. If you sympathize with terrorism and you want more terrorism to happen, then it's going to happen at your event. Your number is going to be up. The same reason I don't want those, neo-Nazi people anywhere near me. Why? Because they're, they do shit like this. That's the whole point. there have been terrorist attacks by neo-Nazis too, so I don't want those people near me. And if I, sympathize with them, then I can say, oh my God, I'm so sad. The neo-Nazis committed crime. I would just say, well, that's why you don't associate with these kind of people, because this is what happens.
And that's really what this all comes down to. Trying to please the progressive left, or even just the political mainstream, by chasing after so-called acceptable opinions while disavowing less accepted ones and groveling for approval doesn't get you anywhere. It actually works counter to what a free speech advocate's goal should be, to maximize the range of acceptable discourse and actively protect views which are seen to lie outside of it. After all, merely providing a platform to someone's speech does not equate to endorsement or agreement. Meaningful support for freedom of speech demands that you must allow everyone's views to be heard. Advancement of or agreement with their agenda is another matter entirely. Progressive-controlled academic institutions and corporate actors who engage in censorship are a powerful collective force in silencing dissent. If we're going to secure our interests and our ability to speak, we must continue to work together by building up parallel structures such as Patreon, Rootbox, Counterfund, and Minds.com. If you consider yourself a free speech advocate and are against the actions of the institutionalized social justice movement, it is your duty to contribute to and promote these parallel institutions and defend all stripes of expression, no matter how unpopular or personally objectionable. Throwing the dissident right wing, or anti-progressives in general, under the bus in efforts to appease social justice ultimately weakens all opposition to it.
It looks like all the Australopithecus are chimping out and terrorizing the Kekistani people.
Does this mean what I think it means?
Yup, they're terrorists.
Does that mean?
Yup, kill them. Kill them all.
Your support helps make my content possible. Special thanks to Thorium, Jeffrey F., Young Roman, Hakabaru, Mitch G., Alex, Schnitzel and Wine, Ryan G., Astro, Rad Rus, Fortress Europa, Excelsion 355, Irked Human, XZY, Chloe F., Cole Alexander, Lysandra Q., John K., Craig V., Fraser Danger, and Paleoconic Teutonic, distributor of Red Pills. See you soon.
Sweet.